This conference will now be recorded.
So, welcome everyone. I'm really excited today to host the webinar on solar parity innovation by the Energy Tech Meetup community. Thank you all for joining today. So first, I will outline some of the housekeeping and the content of today's webinar. We will start with a brief intro to ETM and the topic that we are discussing about today. Then we will jump into the presentations. We will have 10 minutes presentation for each speaker, following a 5-minute question period. So if you have questions, please place them in the chat and direct it to one speaker so that he or she can answer it. Furthermore, this webinar will be recorded and later on be publicly available on our YouTube channel. So, what is Energy Tech Meetup? Energy Tech Meetup is a global community consisting out of professionals, entrepreneurs, investors, students, and basically everyone who has an interest in innovation related to energy and technology. So we are really innovative and global inclusive community. Why we are doing it is because we believe that energy innovation needs a diverse field of expertise and a very strong and interactive innovation ecosystem. And as we believe this does not exist to date, our mission is to connect these people and these ideas in order to accelerate the transition towards sustainable energy systems. Therefore, we are organizing different events, one of them being the webinar that we are holding today, but we are also organizing pitch nights for startups and investors, dine and discuss events, where we discuss in more personal setting different topics and co-hosting innovation workshops and other events. Another way how we try to engage with our community is by sharing prepared content like Newspeak of the Week or Voices of ETM, which we are posting on Medium, as well as ETM Talks, where we're conducting single interviews with people working in the energy innovation space. What is so special about the event today is that we are expanding. Energy Tech Meetup started in Tokyo, and now we already have 3 representatives in Europe. So I'm really excited to see that there's a need for the community. So today's event is the kickoff event for ETM Europe to show that we are active here, and I will invite everybody to promote the community and hope to see the growth in Europe. So talking about the topic, today it's about solar grid parity. But what is solar grid parity? It's basically the point where we see that solar energy, electricity is cheaper than the electricity coming from the grid. So the power mix of coal and other conventional energy sources now has a new competitor, and this is solar. How did we reach that point? We see solar grid parity becoming an occurrence present in many markets, not only in Europe, but in particular in Europe, there has been a lot of innovation happening. These innovations happened basically on 2 sides. We saw a lot of new approaches on the policy side, how to promote these technologies. On the other side, we saw that technological advancement was happening much more rapidly than we anticipated. So these 2 forces have been drawing the solar market as we see today, but this is only on a high level. What we would like to discuss today is the challenges and opportunities that we see in Europe. Therefore, I'm really excited to introduce you to our very first speaker, Ferenc Spies from Solar PV Hungary. He has more than 20 years of experience in scaling sustainable solutions and driving energy transitions. Among others, he has been an international advisor for several environmental organizations and was leading complex carbon reduction programs. Currently, he is scaling up solar projects in Hungary and Central Eastern Europe. He holds a master's a degree in environmental engineering and renewable energies, and he's now joining us today to tell us about new emerging exciting solar power markets in the eastern part of Europe. So therefore, please, I would like you to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armin, and welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to be here on ETM's first European gathering. And yes, it is a very challenging task to summarize in 15 minutes 10 countries, or even actually 11 countries, and I would say the last 10 years, how Central Eastern European countries are getting close to grid parity. So let me go to the first slide. Actually, the rich history is showing all sorts of energy mix that Eastern European countries can have. So we have countries with hydropower, especially in the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, over 30%. Croatia, half of the power generation is hydro. The other hand, especially Poland, Estonia, and the Czech Republic, a vast majority of coal power. We have countries with strong nuclear background, like Slovakia and Hungary. Half of the electricity produced in nuclear power plants, and we have countries with a balanced, partly nuclear, partly coal, and hydropower, like in Romania and Bulgaria. So we have a very diverse starting point when we talk about renewables. And the next slide, it's also the economical power and the capacity of these countries during already the European Union accession discussions. In this slide, a special group called Visegrad 4 countries are highlighted, that in 2017 the GDP per capita in these 4 countries are well below the European average. So in one hand, the economical potential of these countries, the power, are not as strong as like France or Germany. And often the political reasoning in these countries were that if we look at the numbers, how much CO2 reduction happened in these countries, shows that, well, in the EU since 1990, the CO2 emission reduced to 77%, while in Hungary is even more CO2 was reduced. And if you look at the emission per capita in Hungary, for example, is like 25-30% lower than the European average. So to say that these countries are not as rich, but don't emit as much CO2. For renewables, it's less space. And what Armin mentioned in the presentation about policy push, these 4 countries especially were very strong on explaining these argumentations. If we go to the next slide, the other part, okay, why for renewables less CO2 emissions? Yes, it's important, but the other is what price are these countries going to pay for electricity produced from renewables? If you look at the right-hand side, the graph, how much an average European citizens pay for a refrigerator's electricity, you can see that Hungary is one of the lowest, but even Czech Republic is far below the European Union average. And it's also often the argumentation what citizens of these countries can hear, that yes, it's nice to have Denmark with high renewables, but look at their electricity bill of their citizens. It's one of the highest in the EU, and double or triple the price as a Croatian or a Poland citizen pays. So for renewables, there is a higher price. This is also something has to be put into context. But when we move forward, of course, there are inevitable steps for renewables. And if Armin, can you please go for the next slide? There are historical, let's say, enthusiasm waves for solar PV in this region. If you see, in 2009, there was a huge increase in the Czech Republic. Actually, it was, let's say, along the wave of the German solar PV boom in the late 2008, 2009. The Czech government was really going for subsidies, and they reached 2 gigawatts by 2011, and actually it's still there. So they were at that time very enthusiastic, and it was later on a controversial, even political argumentation, and the solar in the Czech Republic not developed since then. Then later on, Slovakia, a couple of years later, also took up and reached around 1 gigawatt. And you can see in 2014-15, when Hungary, Poland were, let's say, taking more advantage of the technological advance, the cheaper panel prices, and all the lessons that Czech and Slovakian feed-in tariff schemes taught for the politicians at that time. I would also highlight another aspect of why renewables is the less, let's say, supply risk of importing electricity. And if you look at the blue areas on that map, that shows the net importers of electricity, and the Central and Eastern European countries, almost with the Czech exception, all are importing electricity. So to say that whatever you produce locally, and solar and wind are often produced obviously locally, it reduces the electricity import risk, let's say, of these countries. So it has a very strong impact of local supply. So not only price and not only CO2 reduction, but energy independence can be an argument in this region. If we look at another big European map, I already mentioned that coal has a traditionally long history in especially in Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, and part of Hungary. Often these countries are arguing that the social role that coal mining and all the fossil industry is providing is very important, and therefore less space for renewables. But actually, like a study shows, looking at all coal regions in Europe, that turning to renewables not only technically feasible in coal regions where the grid is actually available, huge former mining sites are available, but those people living in that area can learn. And actually in Spain there are projects where skills are transferred from the electrical and engineering side, from the coal industry to the renewables. If we look at one particular country, it's Poland. Here we have seen, if you remember the graph, the country is regarding solar really taking off. They closed one auction with about 2,500 megawatts. 160 projects were delivered, which is already a huge jump. But looking at the Polish national plan for energy and climate, they are envisioning 8 gigawatt more solar by 2030. And if you look at this graph, yellow really shows that yellow is eating up the black. So solar is kind of taking over the coal electricity production. And this shows not only up to 2030, but up to 2040, where additional 5 gigawatts are planned for every 5 years. If we look for another country, on the next slide is Hungary. Here something similar can be observed. I choose on the right corner 2 days from last April and this April, and again you see the more thick yellow is close to 1 gigawatt solar production during noon, and the thinner red area is the less coal that has to be burned for electricity production. So already in 1 year, almost double solar production what has been observed. And in that April, actually, that was during the lockdown. And actually in Hungary, the electricity demand was not as lower than in Western Europe, but the import was very low due to the high solar during daytime. So that's already the advantage of having solar in Hungary. And the plans are again very ambitious. A new auction is just announced for between September the 15th and October 15th. 300 gigawatt hour will be auctioned, and 4 more auctions are envisioned. And actually the first auction that was closed last December already brought prices which are very close to grid parity. So to say, in Hungary we are expecting that the next auctions will, especially in a larger scale power plants, reach the grid parity. And the next slide, I just mentioned large scale. This graph I picked from Rystad Energy. Actually, I would highlight that all references with the link I recommend for those interested in the region to really look up. I try to pick the latest data. This one is from this year's experience globally, and showing the darker areas, the larger power plants. And here we talk about over 100, 200, 500 megawatts. In Europe, it's still not that common, but the right-hand side images are showing in Hungary what does it mean 15 or 20 megawatt power plants. These are getting really big, and this also drives prices down, because lower hardware cost, lower fixed cost like fence around these areas. Of course, this brings more environmental and landscape concerns, but as we see in the rest of the world that bigger single power plants will be built, this is something we can also expect for Hungary. And my last slide brings two stories to one slide, and the one is showing the subsidy and the money that, for example, the Hungarian auction scheme is spending for 200 gigawatt hour. If we would look at the Hungarian nuclear power plant capacity and multiply this subsidy to the capacity of the nuclear power plant, we can see on that graph the yellow line is the something equal amount of subsidy that has or would have been spent for the same electricity that the nuclear power plant is generating. And I just use this graph highlighting other electricity generation costs, like the waste that a nuclear power plant has to be handled. And this is something amazed me, that until 2085, there is a budget to handle nuclear waste, and it is somehow comparable what for solar subsidy we would need to spend. But the good news from Poland, that Bavaria, a huge solar company in Witnica in Poland, already started commissioning the first subsidy-free solar plant in Poland. So this shows it's actually a 60-something megawatt, so kind of also underpinning my previous message that bigger plants are closer to grid parity. In Poland, this is happening, and we can expect that this part of Europe, investors will also reach this status for solar. Thank you, and I would pass over to Amanda. Maybe Armin, your mic.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for the presentation. There have been a good example of very important questions which are still unanswered. One that you pointed out, the arguments which are constantly floating around in Europe between the eastern part, which is more coal-heavy lusted, also like the import and export dependencies, basically, that we are well aware of these interdependencies, and then we have to figure out a way if we want to make solar integration possible. And as well as highlighting like these two examples on Poland and Hungary, also offering some optimistic view on Hungary, that we are very close or on the edge of reaching solar grid parity. And yeah, also really important, the question about the subsidy and the environmental impact and what we want to achieve with that, how we can make best use of that. That being said, I would like to give the audience the chance to pose some questions. So far, I can't see any questions in the chat, so I will wait one more minute, otherwise I will just go ahead with one of mine. Okay, I got one. We saw the role of politics. How does the political climate influence intervention?
Well, I was talking about several countries, and in certain questions, certain group of countries are teaming up. In other discussions, other groups are teaming up. So it is always let's say a particular interest driven how they are arguing. But in general, I think both the Polish and the Hungarian example shows that there is a government commitment for renewables, and there are also steps showing that there is a space, and this example of subsidy-free project shows that foreign investors are willing to enter to the market and bringing fresh capital to countries where are even not in the Eurozone, for example. So I think that shows commitment from these countries.
Okay, thank you. I think this not only shows commitment, but also like the opportunities which are opening now in Eastern Europe. And we further have the opportunity in the discussion round to ask more questions. Looking at the time, I would like to introduce to you the next speaker, Amanda Nicholas from Pexapark, and she will introduce us to power purchase agreements and the price development. She has more than 6 years of experience as energy consultant and energy analyst, and was providing power market and energy risk management training to over more than 800 energy stakeholders around Europe, Australia, and Asia. She joined Pexapark in the beginning of 1920. She is now developed a research product line at Pexapark and led a variety of PPP negotiations across Europe. And before joining Pexapark, she was working at the Australian energy market operator in the operational team, providing advice across a range of power market issues to both public and private stakeholders. So that being said, I would like to hand over to you, Amanda. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to be able to speak today. So let me just introduce very briefly Pexapark. So we are a software and consultancy company specialized in power purchase agreements, so PPAs, and in renewable energy risk management. Basically, we provide support to investors mainly by helping them managing their risks while optimizing their revenues. And also helping the buyer side by providing more transparency in the market and providing some standards into the market. So far we have been present all over Europe and in the US, and we have advised over 6,000 megawatts of transactions for renewable assets since our launch in 2017. And our headquarters is based in Zurich in Switzerland. And it's today with this experience that I'm going to try to explain in 10 minutes what are these power purchase agreements, these PPAs, how they have become important, and I'll also share some insight into PPA pricing in Europe and also some of their development.
All right, thank you very much and taking up the challenge. There's one thing why I'm interrupting you. The audio seems to be kind of difficult. Maybe you can change some of the headset setting or the distance to the mic before going forward.
Apologies. The mic is in my headset actually. Is it better now or not?
It's similar, but I guess we can handle it.
Okay, if not, I can try to switch off the headsets. Let me know. All right, so I hope you can hear me. So we've touched upon a bit briefly on government subsidies, and it's true that at the beginning they enabled the first investments in renewable energy. And what that meant for an investor was that it was providing a solid government-backed counterparty for these producers. And it enabled relatively secured investments. So as long as the asset was maintained correctly, the producer got paid. And exactly how much the producer got paid was mainly influenced by the weather and how good the asset was managed. So there was no need to worry about pricing, but mainly just about volume risk or production risk, which is anyway ever present for a producer. Can you hear me properly?
We can hear you, but maybe you can try it without headset if it's possible.
Okay, I'll turn off my headset. Apologies.
Thank you.
Is it better now?
Yes, it's better. Thank you.
But I cannot hear you, so.
Yes, it's much better.
Thumbs up if
Thank
you
you.
can hear me. All right, I'll continue. Hopefully you can hear me. Yes. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so for a number of reasons, the feed-in tariffs have been disappearing or changing to a more market-based one. So some of these have been discussed already. So there's been a decrease in technology costs, making it more feasible for renewables to be developed subsidy-free, and also a bit more difficult to set appropriate levels of subsidies. There was also some financial pressure on government after the financial crisis, and there was a general European directive that support schemes should be auction-based. On to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so there's been some developments in subsidies towards more market-based subsidy schemes. And when we look now in the detail, there are many different schemes across Europe, and I'm not going to go over them in detail. But the message here is that even the new schemes are shifting now some of the risk onto the producer, onto the asset owners. So we can see that most of Europe is now dominated by auction-based schemes. However, some investors and developers are not going to wait for this next auction and are just going to decide to develop this on their own. And this is where these power purchase agreements, these PPAs, come into play to provide that security that is no longer present without subsidy schemes. And the next slide basically just shows that we are now moving away from what was almost a real estate business model where you just had to obtain land rights, build your asset, and then maintain your asset, to a new era, if you want, a new field of true energy risk management, where you require energy market expertise and how to deal with uncertain revenues, basically. And the next slides puts this power price volatility, this power price risk into perspective. So there I plotted the volatility of other asset class against power prices. So you can see power prices in orange there. When you look at, sorry, I'm still on that slide. When you look at the kind of middle blue line at the bottom, you can see that this represents the volatility of a government debt. And then the line just above that is foreign exchange, and then the darker blue line is the stock market. So we could perhaps say that an investment feed-in tariff for renewable assets was comparable to an investment in government bonds. But you can see that the volatility for these government bonds is comparatively low compared to these very volatile power prices. And you can see that even the stock exchange here, represented by the S&P 500 in dark blue, is even less volatile than power prices. And this is the new world of investing in renewable assets. So to build a new asset, lenders will often come into place, and without some sort of security, they're not willing to lend. And this is where power purchase agreements, or PPAs, come into place. So it's an agreement between the future owner of the asset and the energy buyer of the energy that will be produced by that asset, where they agree to buy and sell the future energy at a fixed price for a long period of time, usually 10 years. And this contract then provides sufficient certainty in the future revenues for the lenders to then lend the funds necessary to enable this investment in renewable assets. And on to the next slides. Here, basically, it's not just, okay, we found a solution, these are power purchase agreements. These contracts are quite complex. There are a lot of risks that needs to be taken into account and negotiated between both the buyer and the seller side. So for example, pricing. How do you fix a price for 10 years in the future? When do you fix it? Liquidity as well. That means how active is a market, how many buyers and sellers do you have into the market? Will you shift the price significantly if you put a large volume in the market? And then there are also other risks like profile risk. A solar plant has a profile. It's not, it doesn't have a base load profile like a coal plant, for example. It won't produce the same during the day than at night. You cannot guarantee its production at 100%. So that comes at a risk as well. And there are many other risks that needs to be negotiated. So these contracts are complex and they take a long time to negotiate. But I want to tell you a bit about the trends of these PPAs and these PPA prices that we have seen in Europe. So, who are actually signing these PPAs? I think we all hear a lot about corporate PPAs, maybe Google, IKEA, Amazon, Microsoft, that have been signing PPAs and that are into renewable energy. But when you actually look at the amount of PPAs, so these contracts that have been signed, the majority of these contracts are actually signed by utilities. And we counted how many deals were completed by utilities last year, for example, and we had about 7.8 gigawatts of these PPAs signed. And it's important to note that there are a lot of these contracts that are actually not publicly announced. So that amount would actually be relatively more. But I would say that the players in the market changed quite a lot. For example, if we look 2 years ago, some of the oil majors like Shell have started to participate in the market. We can see also participants starting to be active in more than just one country. And then, of course, you will have the local players, so players that only work in Poland, for example. But in Europe, in terms of very large players, you'll have only about 8 to 10 really big market players. And then in the next slide, I wanted to give you a bit of an idea of what are these PPA prices, where are they at? So I guess the first takeaway here is that there's not one blanket price for Europe, where there's lots of, the prices will differ quite a lot by region. And these PPA prices will also change as well depending on the technology, whether we're talking about solar asset or we're talking about wind assets, how long the contract is, how big is the asset, where is it located precisely, is it in the north, in the south of Italy, for example, and so on. And the prices that you see here are actually our own PPA prices. That we have averaged, but the average of several technologies, several tenor of contracts. So I would like for you to take a grain of salt on these prices. And I've put a little solar plans onto the areas where we have seen mostly solar power purchase agreement contract being signed. So for example, Spain, Italy, but also Great Britain, Germany, and France. For example, in France, there are still some heavy subsidies, but not in certain areas like agricultural land where it's not eligible. And that's an opportunity for solar PPAs, for example. And then on the next slide, I want to explain, what drives these PPA prices. So here you can actually see, and that comes from our website, you can see an average of PPA prices in Europe if you want. And you can have access to this for free onto our website. And you can see actually that over the years, the PPA prices are actually fluctuating. So the question is, what are triggering the move? And it actually comes from baseload prices on exchanges. So if you go on NASDAQ or on EEX, you'll see these futures contracts with futures prices. And that's how what PPAs are based on, essentially what the price that you can trade today for the future. And they will depend on how quickly you can trade prices, what are the risk appetite of the market, how liquid it is. I mentioned there's only about 8 to 10 players. So there may be a lot of projects as well, but not as many buyers. And just because there is a price, just because there is a market, it doesn't mean that there is not necessarily a buyer on the other side. And you can see that big dip here represents what happened during the COVID, where we have seen a significant demand disruption of at least 30%, and that has had an impact on PPA prices as well. But now we are observing a bit of a pickup of these prices, also a pickup of these deals. But if you look at the level of the price, it's not at the level as to where it was before. And you could think, oh, well, this is the perfect opportunity for corporates to sign PPA deals. But actually, it has to match both the corporate buyer, but also the developer, the owner of the asset, right? There has to be a price that actually enable them to be able to build an asset as well. So if this matches, then we believe there'll be a lot of deal flows. And then just to conclude on the next slide, basically the takeaway for you guys is that, well, PPAs are used to provide security when subsidies are no longer present or needed or not sufficient. But they also require some knowledge of energy risk management, and they are not simple contracts. And to give you an idea of what they represent in Europe, they represent about 25% of the market. And to give you a bit of takeaway of what we believe, what are the next steps for PPAs. So we've seen 2020 starting very strongly with lots of deals being publicly announced. Then we saw a dip during Corona, but now it seems to be picking up again, which is really positive. And I think there'll be a significant wave of new PPAs, of corporate PPAs as well, involving non-subsidized projects for solar, probably mainly in Germany and in Spain. And I'll be happy to take any questions or go into more details in a topic.
All right, thank you for your presentation. First of all, I want to wrap up again. So some of the key aspects which I figured is, first of all, it is very interesting to see that PPAs, the new innovation, basically are only handled by a handful of corporations in Europe. But still, on the other side, they have been introduced because of the growing uncertainty, but itself, PPAs are still having some difficulties with certainty in themselves. So one of the questions coming from the audience is basically regarding this particular topic, like how do we make this new innovative instrument more available, more accessible? So what are the challenges of setting up a PPAs? How can you get into a PPA agreement? What are the difficulties when setting them up? So maybe you sign them up and then suddenly they fail because of certain occurrences. What are your experience in that?
So how can we make them more common, if that's the question? So basically, I think one of the hurdles is that the market is not very transparent. So I guess that's where we are trying to provide more transparency in the market in terms of pricing by calculating these PPAs. And also there's been some effort to provide more standardization in terms of having a standard contract with predefined terms that kind of need to be negotiated. But I think there's an important educational part that needs to be done. You know, what are the risks that needs to be negotiated? What are the risks involved with the, you know, after the era of subsidies? I think these are the ways to make to enable perhaps more PPAs being signed. Or...
Okay, thank you. There's another question. Who pays the balancing power price for solar PPAs? During nighttime, the same prices are applying as the ones the map shown?
So that will depend on the contract. Usually the way it's done is that there may be a fixed fee that will be paid by the seller, for example, for the buyer to manage the balancing. Or there could be a third party that will be involved in this agreement where they will handle the balancing for a certain fee. But usually it's a pre-agreed fixed fee, maybe for a shorter term than the contract, and then will be either renegotiated or revised.
All right, thank you. One last question, then we move to the final presentation. It's about the difference between PPAs and intraday and day ahead. So basically bilateral and exchange difference. Maybe you can elaborate on that question.
So the difference in terms of pricing, or so if you want the day ahead prices or the spot prices, are the actually tradable energy prices on the market?
Exactly. I feel the question is about the general difference between these kind of mechanisms to acquire or sell electricity. So the difference between PPAs and trading on intraday and day ahead market.
Yep. Yeah, so maybe what you would agree on in a PPA contract is you would agree on a fixed price for the energy that will be sold. And then if you want on the spot market, maybe you're still gonna have to sell your energy on the spot market through this day ahead. But it could be a contract for difference, for example, where you just settle for the difference between that fixed price and what you ended up having in the spot market. But basically the idea of this PPA contract is that you're not exposed to the volatility of this day ahead market, if you want.
Okay, thank you. There are still some more questions, but let's serve them for the discussion. Now, thank you for the presentation. I'm really pleased to introduce our last speaker, Merkel Labordena. Please forgive me if I don't pronounce it right. And she will introduce us to the role of solar in making Europe's energy system climate neutral. And I'm really excited about the presentation. She's currently a senior policy advisor at SolarPower Europe, the European Solar Industrial Association, which is representing over 200 organizations across the whole solar photovoltaic value chain, where she advises on policies regarding the digitalization of the solar sector and corporate sourcing of renewable energy and sustainable finance. Before she was joining SolarPower Europe, she led projects at the Climate Policy Group at the ETH Zurich and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory of the US on strategies to increase the rate of investment into solar power. Furthermore, she is certified in climate and renewable energy finance by the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management and pursued executive education at the State Business and Law School, and also holds a double degree in Master Science in Renewable Energies with a specialization in energy innovation and energy engineering. So I'm really excited to hear your perspective, and I'm handing over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And also, thank you very much, Ferenc and Amanda, for your presentations. Were very, very interesting. So thank you very much for your contributions. And I'm going to type up what you have said with like a vision into the future. And as mentioned, I am Marcela Bordena, and I am the Senior Policy Advisor for SolarPower Europe. And as you may be aware, Europe now has a new Green Deal, an EU Green Deal, who our President, Ms. von der Leyen, she set up. And in the frame of this new EU Green Deal, we actually have very, very interesting challenges. And one of them is actually to reach climate neutrality by 2050. So actually that's easiest said than done. And we need to find out how we do that. So next slide, please. What's the EU Green Deal? So actually, that's a lot of like large packages together. That's a lot of measures put together. And the most important ones are actually, one is to enshrine this objective of reaching climate neutrality by 2050 into law, which is the European Climate Law. Then also that would entail to revise the target for the greenhouse gas emissions from 40% up to, even if we are lucky, to 55%. Then of course we need to finance this transition, say from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And that's not an easy task. So for that, it would be even more like difficult for those regions that are actually highly reliant on fossil fuels, particularly on coal, which in Europe mostly are focused on Eastern Europe. Then also the Commission reaffirmed the crucial role of renewables, but it's not very clear like the steps to be done in between. So we know that we want to reach climate neutrality by 2050, but how do we do that? And then it's also important to have in mind that the Commission has already done their homework, and they have modeled actually how Europe could look like in the future. But it's also very important to remark that all the modeling scenarios that they have done, that was around 2018, and remember that the Green Deal is very recent. These scenarios actually, and none of them considered like, we're all doing like considering the role of the carbon sinks. So the carbon sinks, as you may know, is the role of the forests. So far, the Commission has not modeled how the Europe could look like in 2050, just based on 100% renewable energy system. And that's actually what SolarPower Europe has done. So we want to ask this question. Can, on one side, Europe reach climate neutrality by 2050 only relying on renewable energy? And second, how? So we can see in the next slide the scenarios that we have modeled. And we have split the scenarios into three. So we name it the laggard, the moderate, and the leadership scenario. So as you can see, like in the second row, the leadership scenario is the only one that is aligned with the Paris Agreement of reaching just a 1.5 degrees, while the moderate is 2 degrees, and the laggard is just well off. So also it's very important to see like the fourth row, that in the leadership scenario, we show that we can achieve like a phase out of fossil fuels by 2040, and then for the moderate scenario, I will show it later, that can be achieved in 2050. So all these scenarios are showcased this in the report that you are seeing here in the right, which you just can download for free and check all the data. And also recently, like 2 days ago or something, we just released all the Excel files, so you just can play around. Perfect, next slide. So that's actually very interesting how we do all this process, how we move from the current situation in the up to 2050. And we found out that the first step, we need to actually prioritize the direct electrification of all the sectors of the economy. So that means the industry, that means transport, housing, etc. So electrify as much as possible all these sectors. And our model shows that by 2050, that would mean an electrification ratio of about 85%. Next slide. Then that's the 85%, so we are not there yet. And for these sectors that actually what we call the hard to abate sectors, which meaning like the heavy industry, marine, and aviation sectors, we need to rely on other carriers to help us with this decarbonization. So for these sectors that actually are too expensive, or the direct electrification is basically not technically viable, we need to rely, for instance, on hydrogen. And by hydrogen, I mean renewable energy-based hydrogen. So you can use the generation from the solar plants and generate renewable-based hydrogen that you can store and that you can use later to decarbonize these hard-to-abate sectors. Very good. Next slide. And actually, it's 100% renewable energy system is not only possible, but actually, if you can see like the last the far most right, you can see that is also when approaching it from the leadership scenario, meaning to be aligned with the 1.5 degrees of the Paris Agreement, is actually the cheapest option. So it does not only make sense from the emissions point of view, but also makes sense from economic point of view. Next slide. So far I have been talking about like a renewable energy based system, like in general, consider all the technologies. And I wanted to highlight what is the specific role of solar in all this. And we will see that actually this transition will be a solar story. And why is that? So I have outlined here like the 5 main reasons. And as you may know, the first one, solar is like a zero emissions technology, only considering the emissions through the life cycle. It has like some residual emissions. Also is the lowest cost clean energy technology. You can see that in the graph of the right, where it compares like the utility scale levelized cost of electricity for several locations in Europe. And just take Munich, for instance. So actually, the yellow bullets, those are the current wholesale electricity prices, while the yellow bullets, that's the industrial electricity prices. So of course, they are more expensive. While the blue bars, that's actually the levelized cost of electricity from this utility scale PV plant. And as you can see right now, more or less the modeling shows that it reaches about 40 euros per megawatt hour. And in a map that Amanda has shown previously, we can see that actually there has been PPAs signed at about 35 euros per megawatt hour. So also we can see that the costs are falling and rapidly. And not only that technology that is interesting from the economic point of view, but also it creates jobs. It creates green jobs. And by 2050, it could deliver about 4 million jobs. And this is not only very important for the regions that I mentioned before that so far are highly reliant on coal, because you actually can train, upskill people working in this sector to install and to operate and to maintain the solar plants. Then also there are surveys that show that solar is the most socially accepted electricity source for all Europeans. So they do prefer this technology better than, say, bio or say wind or say another one. And it's also very interesting to take into account that solar is a very flexible technology, meaning that you not only can find it in the form of like utility scale plants, say at the outskirts of any city, but you now can find it in the buildings, facades, incorporated on the facades and also on water bodies, what we call the floating solar plants, and also the agri-PV, which is solar plants coupled with agriculture. Very good. Next slide. And what I mentioned before, all these characteristics result in solar actually generating about 60% of EU's electricity by 2050. You can see it in the second and third scenarios, the moderate and leadership, which solar is just outpace any other renewable energy technology. Next slide, please. So actually, I've been talking so far about the future, how the future may look like. But to achieve that future, we need to take action now. So what do we need to change now for that future to happen? Next slide. In here, I have outlined, like, say, 4 recommendations or 4 items that we really need to consider now to be most likely to achieve that future. And the first one is that we need to review this 40% emissions target, upscaling it unto 55% if possible, and also to enshrine in law the objective of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. Once done that, we also need to focus on prioritizing the direct electrification of all the sectors of the economy as much as possible. And for those that maybe is not economically viable or technically possible, then we need to think about these other solutions like renewable-based hydrogen. Then, of course, EU policies must support the market expansion of innovative business models. And that is the ones that actually Amanda has talked about, the power purchase agreements, because these, they can secure the low-cost renewable electricity over a long time period, and they do not require the public support from the government. So corporates alone, they can handle that. Then also taking into account that potentially solar can generate up to 2/3 of EU's power by 2050 or even by 2040. Actually, we need to work hard now on deploying other technologies that would enable this transition, that would keep the grid stable. And by that, I mean the deployment of smart, efficient, and also decentralized flexibility resources. And together with renewables, we need to deploy as well as much as possible electric vehicles together with the charging stations, and also electric heat pumps, and of course, renewables coupled with battery storage, and also together with demand-side measures, for instance. So we really need to make all the system to be flexible. And because so this is not only like a renewables story, not even a solar story, we really need to put all the meat here in the barbecue to achieve that future. And for that would mean that we really need to work hard to deploy these flexible options, just to keep our grids stable and just not to face one day with some blackouts, some brownouts. Very good. So that is my last slide. And I just wanted to show you what needs to be done now to move further, to move forward. And that's a lot of work to do. But happy to take any questions on this.
Thank you very much for that rich presentation. And also what I really appreciate is you're not only highlighting the challenges and the problems that we currently have and that we might miss our international visions, but you propose 4 concrete actions that we have to take in order to achieve them. So I will start with the first question from the audience, which is, how do you see the future after grid parity is reached? Today's solar power will be more expensive than tomorrow's even cheaper solar power. Won't they cannibalize the value of the present asset?
Yes, in the future, solar will be cheap. Now it's cheap and will be even cheaper. Crazy cheap. But there's no other way. I mean, we really need to deploy renewables as much as possible. And as mentioned, we do not only need to focus on renewables, but we really need to focus on these other flexible resources, which actually would be absolutely key to have one day this 100% renewable future. So this is not a renewables story. This is, I would say, like a flexible options story. We need to equip all our houses, all our buildings with demand-side flexible options as much as possible. And that means smart grids, that means smart meters. We just need them. So there's no other way without them.
I completely share your enthusiasm, and I do believe we have to use every tool that is available for us. And I think that integration of technologies in that space together is key for solving this challenge. So we shouldn't look at PV isolated from the levelized cost of electricity, but from a more integrated approach. So what are the costs of solar and battery together? And then we are entering a really complex discussion as we have multiple opportunities to market these new forms of assets. So this is also one of the reasons why we decided on that topic to do some kind of a provocation. Is that old thinking of solar versus conventional energy prices, is it still valid today, where we have a completely different energy system, which is much more interacting with each other?
And also, building on your point about system integration, actually, that's very timely, because at the beginning of July, the European Commission released what is called the energy integration strategy, or the system energy integration strategy, together with the EU hydrogen strategy. So right now, we are, of course, having these discussions at the EU level about how to integrate all the sectors of the economy as much as possible, because only with a full integration of the systems, and by that full integration, I mean the electrification of all these systems, we can achieve this future. And that, of course, has a lot of challenges in the way. So when you electrify everything, and when you expect some, say, your electric vehicle to be connected to your fridge, I mean, now you need to talk about all the issues regarding to interoperability. And for that, also from the European Commission side, they are working on how to actually solve all the issues of interoperability, data sharing, data access, because your electric vehicle, it generates data, and your fridge generates data. And when talking about this system integration, it's not that easy. I mean, these are all these nitty-gritties. You really need to solve for all of the actors and market players to agree and to move forward together.
Okay, I think we can directly enter the discussion. This is already pretty exciting.
Okay.
So there's one last question I would like to ask Amanda, which we couldn't answer before, and it's about PPAs. Is it kind of the silver bullet for the post-subsidy world feed-in tariff, or do we need other tools to kind of make this happen? What else is there? What are the flaws of PPAs?
Yeah, I mean, PPAs do work, but I mean, before the COVID, we have seen some actually assets that were built completely merchant, actually with no PPA, no obvious form of hedge. I mean, there are different ways you could protect. When I say hedge, I'm saying protect yourself against the volatility of power prices. And that's not necessarily just PPAs. It can come under the form of, you know, a bit of trading expertise where you can do what we call stack and roll. You can look at shorter term PPAs. I think there are different forms of hedges that can be done out there, but I think the hurdle is really the complexity that comes around it. Of you need some expertise of energy risk management, and I think companies are slowly shifting towards that. It's you know, it's almost a reinvention. You need to think of a team that has that expertise. Like the business has to change internally, and that just takes time. So PPAs, yes, but not just PPAs.
Okay, understood. So it can be a really powerful weapon, but it still has its challenges on its own. There's another really exciting question I would like to pose to Mercer. It's about the policy aspects. So we've seen that there are many different and diverse support mechanisms in Europe at this stage. And the question is about if we don't need them anymore, like how can they be outphased and what challenges can we expect? Maybe there are some observations you already made. There have been already multiple changes in the policy aspect. Maybe you can highlight some of them.
Well, the key thing actually is not only about removing the subsidies to renewables, but to remove the subsidies to fossil fuels. So once we do remove the subsidies to fossil fuels, then we are in the same playing field. What is not fair, as you may agree, is to keep the subsidies for once and not for the others. So the thing about removing all the subsidies for solar, that can be, well, maybe some regions, they may still need them. But we actually, what we need to do is to remove the subsidies to fossil fuels, and then we would be playing in the same playing field.
Okay, understood. So we have to level the playing field first. Okay, there's one more question for Ferenc. It's about the transition from coal-intensive region to more solar dominated markets, let's say. From experience or from my observation as somebody who grew up in Germany and been researching a lot about the energy transition there, the most resistance, what I observed from the coal incumbents, it's about the employees. It's about how can we reskill or transition the employees to new form of working in the renewable space. And this is still a challenge today. And the question is about, is that already a discussion in places like Poland and Hungary? Are there already like some kind of mechanism in place or discussed about how to make that transition happen within the different skill sets of the people working in the energy space?
Actually, yes, there are discussions. In one of my slides, one of the large PV plants, let's say in Hungarian scale, like a 20 megawatt power plant, is actually built in one of the former mining sites in Hungary. And the people involved into the project, they were employees of the power plant, the coal power plant. So some of the guys there got really enthusiastic about solar, they really get skilled. They were trained, and they looked how transformer station can be modified, and they did really a good engineering job. So not brought out of the shelf PV plant close to the coal power plant, but they really went through this process. And I think this really gives a hope that it's not something absolutely new what you have to learn, but if you have a good engineering and electric engineering background, it is something you can definitely learn. So I think, yes, this is happening. And also there are good examples in the US, in Germany, where these type of trainings and reskilling took place. So that's also something I think we can learn from.
All right, thank you a lot. Looking at the time, I'm really sad that I have to make like one final question for every speaker, and it's about what do you see the greatest challenge for a further deployment of solar in Europe? If we can answer that question in the order we had the presentation, it would be great.
Okay, it is also goes back to the history that the network, we were talking about grid parity, but we were not talking much about the grid itself. And I think Ukraine is a good example where a huge PV boom took place, but the grid was not upgraded over the last decades, and now they are facing big challenges because there are the PV plants, but the grid cannot handle. And in many other Central Eastern European countries, this is what we are going to face, not the cost of the PV, which is not affordable, but the cost for upgrading the grid to be able to handle solar power. That will be a challenge. And I think it also shows the battery storage, the demand side response that were discussed. A big 100 megawatt power plant with a battery storage can help these challenges of the grid. And I think this will be a good testing field for that part of Europe.
Okay, thank you for sharing your perspective.
Perhaps something to take into consideration, if you want to, increase the amount of renewable energy, that's great, but there is also space limitation. I guess, how can we use better space? But I think we get a lot of innovative ideas now. Rooftops are being used for solar. Old airplane landing strips are being used for solars as well. I think there is a few opportunities for that, but I guess one of the issues is space in Europe for all this renewable energy.
All right, thank you.
And on my side, I think that we need to work on removing the challenges and also the barriers at a regulatory and administrative level, because there are. So the states, the member states, they are not making this easy, and there are still a lot of barriers at regulatory level in almost all the member states that impede really to unlock like the full potential of solar in each of the states. So with that, that's our job, to advocate for better regulations for Spain, for France, for Italy, for Poland, etc. So for the governments to try to ease the process and try to make it easier for utilities, for corporates, etc., and also for private households as well, so for private consumers, to do the installations that they want. So it's not easy. There has been several advances, of course. Recently, we have the concept of collective self-consumption and renewable energy communities, which is not only about one like entity, one person, but already like talking about a community, which is fantastic, because now when talking about an energy transition, it's not only about an individual itself, and that's only about the individual, but now we are actually talking about groups and communities and citizens working together towards this transition, which is very nice. But that's not possible across all the member states, and that's why we need to actually work advocating for better regulations.
Right, thank you a lot. And I think this was a really good final statement. Working together, and during the presentation we saw a lot of challenges which might be able to overcome if the collaboration might be strengthened. And this gives me hope that what we are doing at Energy Tech Meetup also brings some value to that innovation space, and to make some progress in Europe, and maybe even achieve climate neutrality faster than we think. So again, thank you everyone for your excellent contribution as speaker. I really appreciate all the effort that you put into your presentation, and to all the attendees, thank you for joining us today. What I want to do is just making some advertisement for one of our next events at Energy Tech Meetup. Please feel free to join us. This time it's about energy transition in Japan, a French-Japanese innovation partnership. It will take place on the 25th August at 5 p.m. Japanese time, so take that into account. That being said, I'm really glad that all of you joined, and please stay in the discussion, connect with us, and follow our activities. This webinar can be briefly seen in YouTube after we finish it. So thank you all, and I'm looking forward to further discussions with you.